Lovely.
Thank you so much, Amy, not only for having me, but for like reaching out to actually publish this. I never expected to be on this side of a reading. I go to them all the time. I love it. I don't write poetry. I read it. I mostly consider myself a dancer. You may have seen that happen. And I work with sheep, which I'll talk about this project a little bit more later. So last January I went to New Zealand, which is like sheep central. They have a damn lot of sheep there. Because I wanted to learn more. When you work with sheep in California, people have like a big flock. It's like 200 sheep, 300 sheep, especially in the Bay Area. In New Zealand, a standard size flock is about 5,000 sheep. That's like,
Rolling
you're
deep.
okay, doing all right, 5,000, yeah, cool.
And you have 7.
I have 7. Yeah, they heard that and they were like, they would just laugh. They were like, "That's adorable." There's some pet sheep there. But so while I was there, I got inspired to like start writing these funny Facebook posts. So this book is actually all Facebook posts. And Amy saw it and she was like, "Let's make it a chapbook." And I was like, "Okay." So here it is. In New Zealand, we say Z for Z, so this is NZ, it's terrible. That's how you pronounce this. A travelogue. I guess I did it to myself, but on the front cover it says by Jennifer Marie Hoff, and on the side it says by Marie Hoff, which is kind of like indicative of the dual name thing I have going on. I'm just going to start reading.
Wait. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm micromanaging. You weren't going to tell the story of how you got in all
Is the
this
story
trouble.
better before or after?
Oh, your call. I was
don't
thinking
know.
before. Do your thing.
She'll micromanage you. Coin? Should
She'll
you flip a
micromanage
coin?
There's a backstory to all this. So like all of this is fake. Like what I'm gonna read you, like it's not real. A lot of the first posts I was making, people were like, "Are you okay?" Like
That's
what's
so
wrong?
funny.
The first post is like kind of real. Like it was based off of something that really did happen. I'll explain that after I read the book. It also relates to the special binding, which is alpaca yarn that I spun myself. We'll leave it at that. So, seem to currently be hitchhiking around New Zealand after narrowly escaping arrest. Almost happened. Since my escape, I made it back to civilization where a young German tourist helped me to find a job cleaning toilets in a wealthy town by the sea. I then caught a ride to a large plantation where I'm in indentured servitude working in the wool shed. New Zealand is terrible. While working in a wool shed on the North Island of New Zealand, I met a beautiful Frenchman who fell in love with me. However, he was a religious fanatic and also a manipulative egomaniac, so I ditched him at the top of a hill by the sea. Also, I've been devoured by mosquitoes and my boots are soaked with lanolin. Though warned by a New Zealand farmer that blue was the color of a local gang, I forgot and wore a blue bandana, this one, to the post office. As I was getting on my bike to leave, a kid approached me and hissed, "G'day, beach," and plunged a knife in my right shoulder. I pulled it out, handed it back, and said, "You dropped this." She was so surprised she ran away. Later, I healed the wound with manuka honey and silver fern. Next day, I shore 500 sheep while drinking 4 liters of Mountain Dew and listening to ABBA.
Damn.
An unusual summer rainstorm brought a sudden flood to the sheep farm. We rode horses to muster all 5,000 sheep to the Rock, the steepest cliff on the property. As the water rose, the hillside began to crumble beneath us, and my horse began to fidget nervously. I was bucked from my horse in the midst of a bizarre flash flood on a steep New Zealand cliff. I lost consciousness in the swirling muddy water, but somehow, when I awoke, the sun was shining, and a 2-year-old baby was looking into my eyes. "Bicky?" she said. I later learned Bicky means cookie. English. It's very English down there. Biscuit. Half drowned and battling amnesia, I could only remember my name was Marie. Luckily, I was found and nursed back to health by a baby girl named Sophie. Sophie lived in a cardboard box on the top of a hill in eastern New Zealand. It was so intensely windy that every day we repositioned the box because otherwise it would roll down the hill and into the gully, where it was often trampled by wild goats and wandering German backpackers. I was chasing a house made out of cardboard down a hillside when I reached a river. As I walked along it, I met a group of ne'er-do-wells. We also called them gutter punks. I had lost my long-term memory, so all I could tell them was my name was Marie and I lived in a cardboard box.
Mm-hmm.
They accepted me as one of their own, though, and we hung out and smoked cigarettes by the river. Believing I was a punk kid river rat, I found myself hanging out by the Wairoa River with some new buddies. One of them offered me a candy, which they called pea. Next thing I knew, I was in the middle of an apparent ocean, talking in tongues and thrashing about like a fish out of water, despite the fact I was in water, quite a lot of it. While swimming in the South Pacific Ocean, I recovered my previously lost memory. Totally naked and alone, I was then stung in the heart by a 30-meter stingray. I died instantaneously.
That's not really me.
At this point in the Facebook post, people stopped believing that this was real. Oh. After a fatal attack by a gargantuan New Zealand stingray, my spirit was left awash in the South Pacific. In quite desperate search for a body, I returned as a seahorse. Having perished off the coast of New Zealand and reincarnated as a seahorse, I was then quickly swallowed by a tuna fish. The fish proceeded to travel south, where it met the love of its life, a retired and deaf sheepdog with a clubfoot named Chip. Before the fish and its soulmate Chip could face their obvious relationship hurdles, to my relief, the fish was scooped up in the dull silver talons of a large trans-Pacific migratory bird. The silver bird flew to Australia but became tongue-tied while attempting to pronounce the names Wollongong, Woolloomooloo, Woolooware, and Woolara all at once. Flustered, she briefly dropped the fish. It crashed into the Sydney Opera House, where it starred in a surprising cameo role in Bizet's Carmen. Following a short yet well-received run at the opera, the silver bird recovered the tuna fish and continued her ancient trans-Pacific migration pattern to San Francisco. After making a nest at the top of Mount Tam, she laid an egg and flew away. When I finally broke out of the egg, Epilogue, some true notes on false stories. 1, I really did travel to New Zealand. 2, none of these stories actually happened, but are based mildly on things that did, such as 3, I did hitchhike one time. 4, a young German traveler did help me get a work trade position at a hostel in Napier. 5, one of the woofers, a temporary farm worker, at a farm I was at was French. 6, my boots did get soaked with lanolin. 7, a farmer did warn me that blue was the color of the local gang and that I should not sport this blue bandana out in public, and other people on it agreed with him. There's
Damn, New Zealand guy.
like LA. Do we live in LA? 8, the same farmer told me it was possible to heal small cuts using Manuka honey. 9, I saw one of the New Zealand sheep shearers drink 3 1.5-liter bottles of Mountain Dew in one day.
Whoa.
And at one point, an ABBA song was playing. The reference for the I shore 500 sheep in one day is like a professional New Zealand sheep shearer, like the best in the world. It's like a champion sport there, can shear like maybe 200 in a day. Like maybe if they were like really pushing it, they could do like 300 in a day. That's a lot. I can
But
do
you can do
25 in a
400.
day. For reference.
You only have 7 though.
What?
You only have 7 though.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. I can show them all in one day. 10, I met a 2-year-old named Sophie at one farm. 11, Bicky does mean cookie there, as in biscuit. It's very English. 12, I walked along the Ryborough River. Oh, and I didn't put it in here, but P means meth there. That was really wacky. Like, I was watching the news there one day, and there was like a serious newscaster about the proliferance of P labs. And I was just like, what? Is there also like an HIJK lab? I don't know. Anyway, I heard a story about someone dying in the ocean from being stung in the heart by a stingray. I assume, though, that it was more an ordinary size. I met a retired sheepdog with a clubfoot named Chip. I ate fish and chips at one point. There are a lot of places in Sydney, Australia with the word wool in them, and they're very long and rather intimidating to say. I walked by the Sydney Opera House, which was showing Carmen at the time. The last one, my truck broke into pieces in an accident the day I returned. I found out while in line at customs. And that was like my egg breaking, which creeps me out because I wrote the egg post before that happened. So I don't know. Okay, so like the long-waited for backstory on this book. So on the back it says, story inspired by Voltaire, Mark Twain, the Mario Brothers, and Jane. And Jane is the first person I went to stay with in New Zealand. She was this English lady who had like relocated to New Zealand. And before I went there, I was just like looking for places to stay, like woofing things, whatever. But my goal was to stay on like working sheep farms, you know, like places that were like actually like functioning within like the commercial market, when you know, like industrial sheep farming. And so she wrote back to me and said, I don't know if I have what you're looking for, but I have neighbors who maybe could use the help. And, you know, like they're industrial scale, they raise like 5,000 sheep. Let me talk to them. So she ended up like going out of her way to sort of like broker me out to one of her neighbors who was awesome. His name was Brian. He was like Jedi master of sheep herding. He's like totally in touch with like his landscape. Like you walk onto his property and you're like, somebody knows what's going on here. So that was great. It was really awesome. She like really went out of her way for me. She didn't have to. I mean, like I'm just some stranger, like rando person from California. But she like went out of her way to like pick me up. I was in the middle of nowhere. She had to like drive. Her husband drove like an hour out to get me and pick me up, and I stayed at her house, and then she drove me over to Brian's. I stayed with Brian for like 3 days, and then came back over to her place, and I was supposed to stay with them for like a couple days and work until her husband could like take me back into the closest town, which was an hour away. So like I have no idea where I am. I'm in the middle of like rural New Zealand. And as soon as I start staying with her, she just gets really weird and like anal and crazy and just like freaking out. Like it was just strange, and I was like, okay, like this woman like really like went out of her way for me, so I'm just gonna try and like be okay with like her crazy OCD-ness. But then she found out that I was spinning this wool, and instead of being totally charmed by that, she was like, is it raw wool? And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah. Because it had never been processed. And for there, like granted, like it's actually like a big deal. Like a large part of their economy is wool sales. And if you bring like a raw agricultural product into a country, that's like a major thing for them, you know, like it's not good. Like that wool could have like pests in it, eggs, things that could like proliferate in New Zealand and like just be a big problem. So, and I should have known that. I just forgot. I don't know. So I had this pound of raw alpaca wool. It was very clean anyway. And she just freaked out on me. She just like freaked out and kept freaking out. And I was like, like, what am I supposed to do? I don't even know how to leave. Like, I can't even walk away. I'm in the middle of this ranch, like, in nowhere. And, like, I don't know. And, like, finally she got to a point where she was like, you could go to jail if I report you. You could be arrested and you could go to jail if I report you. You're pushing me to that limit. And I was just like, okay, that's enough. Like, it is time for me to get out of here. Like, I'm just gonna like start walking, you know? And so I ended up like talking to her husband, and he gave me a ride into like this sort of like, I guess you could call it like town. It's just like, there's just like a hotel and a corner store. There's no buses or anything, you know? Like, the only way to get out of there is to like hitchhike. So I was like, just drop me off at the hotel. It's 5 minutes from you. I will hitchhike out of here. You'll never see me again. I will like be out of your hair, because she's obviously just freaking out. Which he did do. He gave me a ride. So this first one is true. Like, I was hitchhiking around New Zealand after like sort of narrowly escaping arrest. I don't think she wasn't going to like report me, but she did want to scare me. And I thought that was like really shitty to do to somebody who's like traveled halfway across the world. So I'm going to mail a copy of this book that was inspired by her, that's bound with this very yarn.
Awesome.
Yeah. As a thank you to Brian, who's awesome. We love Brian. I really don't know if this is going to get to him. Like, the Pongaroa, like, I don't know his address. The Pongaroa Hotel is like, they don't even have an address. That's how rural they are. They're just like the Pongaroa Hotel on Route 52 in New Zealand. Like, that's their address. We're on Route 52. So I have no idea if he's going to get this, but it would be so awesome if he, like, gets this and he shows it to Jane and Jane sees this. She'd be like,
you could send her one, yeah.
Yeah, I don't be like that mean.
Do that mean?
I think it's like really funny that like she freaked out about me having it at Brian's, because she was like, you could like kill Brian's business or whatever, and I was like, Brian doesn't care, like, you're insane.
Not to get too real, but like, was she like, I'm just saying this because I had an intense conversation with someone about like real OCD, like in its extreme.
Oh yeah.
Was she like diagnosed with like intense OCD?
I don't think she was diagnosed with anything, but she was taking extreme doses of homeopathic horse tranquilizer.
Ketamine?
You should definitely send her a copy.
She needs to read this.
Yeah, she's gonna learn like important news for
I'm just, I mean, I really hope that like it's Brian that shows her this, is my hope. That Brian gets this and he's like, that's charming, that's really funny, and he shows it to Jane, and Jane's like,
Well, she's thanked on the
You could be like, show it to Jane.
yeah. Anyway, thanks guys for listening to my funny story.